The cafe buzzed with chatter until a little girl who had never spoken a word lifted her hands. In front of her powerful CEO mother, Emily signed a full sentence to a stranger. The room froze. What stunned everyone even more? The man, just a grease-stained single dad with calloused hands, answered her fluently. And in that instant, the silent child who had lived behind walls for 7 years broke into a radiant smile that would change all their lives forever. The Saturday morning sun filtered gently through the tall windows of Riverside Cafe, painting golden patterns across polished wooden tables. For most of the city, Isabella Harrington was the iron-willed CEO whose name dominated financial news, the woman who negotiated mergers worth billions and dismantled rivals with a single raised brow. But today, she was simply a mother in a cream coat, her hand gently guiding her 7-year-old daughter toward their favorite corner table. Emily's dark curls brushed against her cheeks, her pale blue dress making her look delicate, almost fragile, as she clutched her worn sketchbook to her chest. To strangers, she looked like any other little girl, but Isabella knew better. Born deaf, Emily's world was built of silence. Therapies, specialists, speech coaches, nothing had changed the fact that her daughter had never spoken a word. Even sign language had been slow, hesitant, a language Isabella learned more from textbooks than instinct. Most days, their conversations dissolved into gestures that left both of them frustrated. Today, Isabella just wanted a quiet breakfast, a croissant, a hot chocolate, a fleeting moment to pretend they were ordinary. But as soon as they sat, Emily's eyes strayed across the cafe, widening at a sight that made Isabella frown. A man sat 3 tables away, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms, dusted with sawdust, as if he'd come straight from a workshop. His hands were broad, calloused, but moved with surprising gentleness as he unwrapped a muffin for the boy beside him. The boy, maybe 8, wore sneakers scuffed from playground battles and had a mischievous grin as he scribbled dinosaurs in a notebook. They were, Isabella thought, worlds apart from her own, and yet Emily stared, transfixed. Before Isabella could stop her, Emily slid off her chair and padded toward the man's table. Isabella's breath caught. Emily had never approached strangers, never left her side without prompting. Panic flickered, should she call her back? But something in her daughter's determined little stride made her stay frozen. Emily stopped before the man, her small hands trembling slightly, then lifted them to form a phrase in American Sign Language. Isabella's chest constricted. Her daughter had never initiated conversation with anyone outside her. The man blinked in surprise, then to Isabella's astonishment, his own hands rose, answering her fluidly. His movements were confident, graceful, the rhythm of someone who spoke ESL, not as a second language, but as a natural extension of himself. Emily's face transformed, her eyes glowing with a joy Isabella hadn't seen in years. A smile pure, radiant, unguarded broke across her lips. For a moment, the bustling cafe seemed to hush, as if the universe itself leaned closer to witness. Isabella stood, her pulse hammering. She had paid specialists thousands, flown across states, begged experts to connect with Emily, and here in seconds, this man, this stranger, had done what no one else had managed. The boy beside him looked up curiously, whispering, "Dad, she's signing back. Dad." So he was a single father. Isabella's mind raced, colliding with questions she couldn't yet voice. By the time she reached them, Emily was rummaging in her small backpack. With solemn care, she pulled out a bracelet made of colorful beads strung unevenly on twine. Isabella knew it well. Her daughter had worked on it for months, never letting anyone touch it, clutching it like a secret treasure. She had refused to give it even to cousins or teachers. Now, without hesitation, she pressed it into the man's hand. Isabella gasped. The gesture was unthinkable. Her daughter was entrusting her most guarded possession to a man she had just met. The man looked at the bracelet, then at Isabella, confusion and reverence mingling in his eyes. His voice was low, steady. "She trusts me." Isabella could barely breathe. Emily's tiny fingers tapped her mother's sleeve, then signed a single word, friend. For the first time in years, Isabella felt the fortress around her heart tremble. She had come for coffee and quiet, but something irreversible had begun. That night, long after the cafe had emptied and the city settled into its restless hum, Isabella sat in her study, staring at the bracelet now resting on her desk. The beads were uneven, the twine frayed, but she knew the weight of it. Emily had guarded that little creation like a secret diary. For her to hand it away so freely, it unsettled Isabella more than she cared to admit. Memories clawed at her. The accident that had taken Mark, her husband, came back in jagged flashes. The phone call at midnight, the sterile white of the hospital corridor, the officer's voice telling her there was nothing they could do. Emily had been 3, too young to understand why her father would never come home, but old enough to feel his absence. From that night, Isabella buried herself in work, determined to prove she could carry the company and raise her daughter alone. Success followed magazines, accolades, power, but none of it silenced the gnawing voice that whispered every night, "You are failing as a mother." Emily's silence was the proof. Years of therapy, specialists flown in from Boston and Zurich, endless methods and devices, all had failed. Emily's signing remained minimal, cautious, as if she didn't trust language itself. Until that morning in the cafe, until Daniel Miller. Isabella hadn't expected to see him again, but fate had its own plans. A week later, Emily tugged her hand insistently as they walked past the cafe, signing a single word, friend. And there he was again, seated with his son, a mug of coffee warming his hands. He looked up startled, but his smile came easily. This time Isabella joined them. At first the conversation was stiff, Isabella keeping her CEO composure like armor, but Daniel was patient. His voice was low, steady, as if he measured words not for effect but for honesty. "I wasn't always a carpenter," he said when she asked. "I studied engineering, worked with turbines actually. But when Ben's mother left, I couldn't keep both. I chose him." He said it without bitterness, only a quiet certainty that unsettled Isabella more than arrogance ever had. She noticed the way he watched his son with unconscious protectiveness, a mirror of how she shadowed Emily. When Emily pulled out a fresh sketch to show him, Daniel leaned close, responding in sign with ease. His hands moved like water, natural, confident. Isabella couldn't help but ask, "Where did you learn?" Daniel's eyes softened. "My mother lost her hearing in her 50s. Most people pulled away, but I couldn't, so I learned. She passed a few years ago, but signing, it stayed. Sometimes I volunteer at the community center. Teach a little." His gaze drifted to the bracelet now looped loosely around his wrist. He frowned, touched it with a thumb. Strange. This pattern, the way the blue bead comes before the red, the knot in the middle, it's familiar. Isabella tilted her head. Emily made that herself. Daniel's brow furrowed, then cleared with quiet astonishment. "I used to teach kids this exact weave. Years back, Saturday mornings. Some wouldn't join in. They'd just sit at the back, watching. I never minded. Sometimes the watchers remember more than the ones tying knots." Isabella froze. Could it be? Had Emily been one of those silent observers, sitting in the corner of a community workshop while she dismissed it as a waste of time? She glanced at her daughter, who now giggled soundlessly as Ben showed her how to fold a paper airplane. The thought pierced her heart. All those years she believed Emily was unreachable. Maybe she had already been reaching quietly, secretly toward this man who had unknowingly left a mark on her world. Isabella's throat tightened. "She remembered you," she whispered, almost to herself. Daniel looked up, startled, then smiled with a humility she hadn't seen in years. "Kids hold on to kindness," he said softly. "Even when we don't know we've given it." For the rest of the afternoon, Isabella barely spoke, lost in thought. She had built an empire of glass and steel, but she had never built the bridge her daughter truly needed. Now watching Emily's hands flutter with new confidence, she realized the bridge had been waiting all along in the quiet memory of a bracelet, and in the man who now wore it like a promise. The days that followed shifted something in Isabella's carefully controlled life. What began as cautious encounters at the cafe became deliberate visits. Emily tugged her sleeve with surprising insistence, her fingers spelling one word again and again: friend. Against every instinct to guard her daughter, Isabella found herself agreeing. So on a bright afternoon, she and Emily walked to Daniel's small workshop at the edge of town. It was a place that smelled of pine and varnish, where sunlight filtered through tall windows and caught on motes of sawdust swirling lazily in the air. Ben greeted them first, bounding out with a grin, his messy hair sticking up like he had wrestled with the wind. Emily smiled, clutching her sketchbook, and for once didn't hide behind her mother's legs. Daniel emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a rag. "Welcome," he said, his voice steady, warm. Isabella felt out of place, dressed in a tailored blouse and heels that seemed absurd against the rough wood floor. Yet Emily was already drawn to the workbench, where small wooden birds and unfinished toys lay scattered like invitations. Daniel crouched beside her, picking up a carving knife but holding it still. He signed carefully. "Every rough edge can be smoothed." Emily's eyes sparkled. She mimicked his movement in sign, then touched the bird with reverence. Isabella watched, stunned, as her daughter leaned forward eagerly. For years, therapists had coaxed and pleaded with Emily to participate. Here, she was choosing to learn. Ben joined them, folding a square of paper into a lopsided airplane. "Dragon," he announced, proud. Emily giggled silently, then added crooked wings with her crayons, passing it back. The two children collapsed into laughter, a soundless symphony that filled the workshop more beautifully than any machine ever could. Over the following weeks, their meetings grew into a rhythm. Sometimes they sat in the cafe, Emily signing short phrases while Daniel corrected gently, teaching her to raise her eyebrows for questions, to hold space in the air for characters. Other times, Isabella brought her daughter to the workshop, where Emily learned to sand wood, to fold paper cranes, to communicate joy in ways words could never carry. Each time, Isabella felt both humbled and awed. The walls that had kept her daughter closed off were crumbling, replaced by bridges made of laughter, sawdust, and colored pencils. She found herself lingering after lessons, speaking quietly with Daniel while the children played. He told her about nights when Ben cried himself to sleep after his mother left, about learning to cook simple meals on a tight budget, about the pride of building furniture with his own hands, even if no one else saw its value. Isabella, in turn, revealed small fragments of her world late nights alone in glass towers, victories that felt hollow, the gnawing guilt of leaving Emily with nannies who never understood her silence. Their conversations were not grand, but steady, like stones laid carefully into place. Something unspoken stretched between them, fragile yet undeniable. One evening, as the children sprawled on the floor with crayons and scraps of wood, Emily grew quiet. She bent over her sketchbook, her brow furrowed in concentration. After several minutes, she tapped her mother's sleeve and held up the drawing. Isabella's breath caught. 4 figures stood beneath a wide, radiant sun. The tallest, drawn in a sharp dress, was unmistakably Isabella. Beside her stood Daniel, sleeves rolled, hands strong. Next to them were Ben and Emily, both smiling, their hands linked. At the bottom of the page, Emily had written a single word in careful, uneven letters she rarely used: family. Isabella's throat tightened. Daniel glanced at her, eyes searching, then back at the drawing. He didn't speak, but the meaning was clear. Emily had voiced her heart without sound, without hesitation. For Isabella, it was both beautiful and terrifying. She had spent years keeping her world contained, convinced that safety meant walls. Now her daughter was tearing them down with crayons and paper, daring her to imagine something she had long forbidden herself, the possibility of belonging again. Isabella smiled faintly, blinking back tears. She sees what we can't yet, Daniel murmured. Isabella nodded, her heart trembling. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder if Emily's picture was not just a wish, but a glimpse of their future. The calm rhythm they had built could not last forever. One Monday morning, Isabella stepped into her glass-walled office to find her assistant pale and nervous, holding a tablet. "You should see this," she whispered. The headline glared in bold, "CEO's Secret Life, Isabella Harrington spotted with unknown single father." Beneath, photos splashed across the screen. Isabella laughing in the cafe, Emily leaning close to Daniel, Ben and Emily sharing crayons at the workshop. To Isabella, they were tender moments of fragile joy. To the world, they became gossip. By noon, the board had summoned her. The conference room buzzed with tension, directors seated like judges beneath the harsh glare of city light. "Isabella," one man began, voice oily with disdain, "this association threatens our reputation. Investors expect discipline, not entanglements with a carpenter." Another leaned forward. "Your daughter's condition already complicates matters. The public doesn't need to see weakness." Each word cut like glass. Isabella's jaw tightened. She had fought tooth and nail to command respect in this room, and now they were dismissing her as if she were reckless, unfit. She left the meeting numb, the city outside a blur of steel and fog. That evening, Daniel noticed the change in her eyes. When she finally admitted what had happened, his shoulders sagged. "They're right," he said quietly. "I don't belong in your world. I'm just a single dad with a workshop. You've built an empire. I can't be the reason it falls." His words were meant to protect, but they felt like a blade. Isabella tried to argue, but he shook his head. "For your sake, for Emily's, I should step back." And just like that, the fragile bridge between their worlds cracked. In the days that followed, the silence returned. Emily, once radiant, grew withdrawn. Her drawings lost their sun. She stopped signing friend and instead clutched blank pages, as if waiting for someone to fill them. Isabella's heart broke, but fear chained her. Could she sacrifice her company for love? Could she risk her daughter's only chance at belonging? The question haunted her until the night of the annual Harrington Gala, the event that defined her empire. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, glasses chimed, and the city's elite filled the air with polite laughter. Isabella stood at the podium, ready to deliver her speech about resilience and growth. But as she unfolded her notes, a small figure appeared at the edge of the stage. Emily. Her pale dress glowed under the lights, her sketchbook pressed tight to her chest. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Isabella's throat closed. "Emily," she whispered, too soft for the microphone. Security hesitated, unsure. And then Emily stepped onto the stage. She set down her sketchbook and raised her hands. The room stilled. Even the champagne bubbles seemed to pause. With deliberate clarity, Emily began to sign. Isabella knew the words instantly. "I want my mom to be happy." Cameras flashed in a frenzy. Guests craned their necks, stunned by the little girl who had never spoken to them, but now spoke volumes without sound. Isabella dropped to her knees beside her daughter, tears burning her eyes. Emily touched her mother's face gently, then repeated the sign. "Happy." At the back of the room, Daniel had slipped in unnoticed, drawn by something he couldn't resist. He froze when he saw Emily standing tall, her hands commanding a ballroom of doubters. Pride and longing warred inside him. The board members shifted uncomfortably, whispers hissing through the crowd. But Isabella rose, Emily's small hand in hers, and faced them all. Her voice rang steady, carried not by numbers or projections, but by conviction. "You call this weakness? Look at her. My daughter's silence has taught me more about strength than any of you ever will. And if loving the man who gave her back her smile is a liability, then perhaps this company needs to remember what resilience truly means." The room fell into stunned quiet. For once, Isabella did not hide. She stood, a mother first, a CEO second, her daughter's courage blazing brighter than every chandelier above. And in that silence, Daniel knew the story was no longer hers alone. It was theirs. The morning after the gala, Isabella expected headlines screaming of scandal, stock dips, and investors demanding her resignation. Instead, the city awoke to something else. Pictures of Emily signing on stage had gone viral. The captions didn't mock. They marveled. The silent voice that spoke the loudest, read one. Others simply showed the girl's small hands in motion, paired with the word happy. For the first time in years, Isabella felt no need to control the narrative. Her daughter had already told it better than she ever could. The board attempted damage control, storming into her office with charts and dire warnings, but Isabella cut them short. "Our company will stand for inclusion," she said firmly. "Not just as an image, but as action. Visual fire alarms in every property. Videophone systems for every tenant. Sightlines in common spaces designed for signing. And an ASL club right here at headquarters. If you think compassion weakens us, you've forgotten what real strength looks like." Some directors blustered, but the momentum had shifted. Investors were captivated by the vision of a company leading in accessibility. What began as a scandal now looked like a revolution. In the weeks that followed, change took root. Employees gathered in the atrium for the first ASL class. Emily, perched shyly at the front, signed slowly at first, then with growing confidence, teaching secretaries and executives alike how to spell their names. Laughter and clumsy attempts filled the air, but for once, the sound wasn't hollow. It was genuine, the hum of a community discovering a new language together. Daniel returned, hesitant at first, unsure if the chasm left by his retreat could be bridged. But Emily answered before Isabella could. She ran to him, signing with deliberate force, "Don't leave again." Daniel knelt, tears blurring his vision, and promised her he wouldn't. For Isabella, his presence was not disruption, but balance. He didn't speak in grand gestures or lofty strategies. He simply showed up, steady as the grain in the wood he carved. And that, she realized, was what she had been missing all along. Their lives wove together in unexpected ways. Ben and Emily became inseparable, creating paper animals that danced across the workshop floor. Isabella traded heels for flats when she visited, learning how to sand a surface until it gleamed. Daniel found himself stepping into boardrooms, not as an intruder, but as someone whose plain wisdom often cut through corporate noise. Emily thrived, her confidence blooming with each passing day. She no longer sat at the edge of life, she stepped into its center. At school, she began teaching classmates simple signs, turning lunch breaks into lessons. At the company, she was known as the little girl who taught executives how to say hope, family, and courage with their hands. Months later, on a bright spring morning, they found themselves back at the cafe where everything had begun. The same corner table by the window. The same warm hum of voices and clatter of cups. Yet everything was different. They were no longer strangers orbiting separate worlds. They were something whole. Emily rummaged in her backpack and pulled out the bracelet she had once given Daniel. Only now it had been restrung. The beads shone in 3 deliberate colors, yellow, white, and purple. Daniel looked at her questioningly, and she signed each meaning slowly. Hope, trust, courage. Then she slipped it onto his wrist once more. Daniel swallowed hard, glancing at Isabella. She reached across the table, her hand covering his, her smile soft but certain. No speeches were needed. The bracelet said everything. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that at a small cafe table, a family had quietly declared itself complete. Isabella had conquered boardrooms and headlines, but here, with sawdust on Daniel's sleeve and sunlight in Emily's smile, she discovered the truest kind of victory, a victory not of power, but of love. And in that simple, ordinary moment, The silence that once haunted them was no longer a prison. It was a language, a bridge, a home. In the end, it wasn't power, status, or wealth that changed their world. It was a child's hand spelling out what her heart had always known. Family is built on love, not perfection. Isabella found the courage to choose happiness over image. Daniel discovered that his quiet strength was exactly what they needed, and Emily showed them all that silence can speak louder than words. The bracelet on Daniel's wrist became more than twine and beads. It was a promise of hope, trust, and courage. Their story reminds us that even the smallest gestures can rebuild broken worlds. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul Stirring Tales, because sometimes the stories we carry inside us deserve to be seen, heard, and remembered.